Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music. And now, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, the New York Stock Exchange ended 2023 with their annual 140-year tradition of singing "Wait Till the Sun Shines, Nelly." And the stock market closed today for the year, so just how were we in 2023? Houthi rebels continue to disrupt shipping in the Middle East. And how will this affect supply chain issues going into next year? And next year is a presidential year, so what does 2024 look like when there's a presidential race? We'll tell you. And today, it's the last trading day of the week for the month and for December, and the last trading day of 2023. And we'll tell you how it all ended. And what's in store for 2024. So stick around for the next 28 minutes because this is Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi and welcome. I'm Andre Laborde with just 2 days left until 2024. The stock market ended today with, well, more of a whimper than a bang, but was carried through by the earlier trading days of December. Today, it was the last day of trading for the week, for the month of December, and the last day of 2023, ending with the stock traders singing "Wait Till the Sun Shines, Nelly" that goes back all the way to the 1860s. Well, actually, the song was started there in 1905, but those other 45 years prior to that, I'm really not sure exactly what they were singing. But at least since 1905, that's been going on in the New York Stock Exchange. Now, last week, an article appeared in the Wall Street Journal that said there are more American households today that own stocks than at any time prior. And it's a fairly rare event for the S&P 500 to close the year on a high. In fact, this year we missed it by less than 1%. Now, since 1928, when they first started recording it, when they started keeping records, it only happened 8 times. The most recent in 2020 and 2013. But it has also closed on a high in 1963, 1958, 1954, and for the first time the S&P 500 closed the year on a high was in 1928. Now, to say the S&P 500 has had a monster year is a bit of an understatement. And, of course, no one in television ever hypes a point just to grab your attention. That we would never do in television. But even we were astonished for the returns of 2023. 52 stocks in the S&P 500 have risen 50% or more this year. And 12 stocks in the S&P index have doubled this year, rising 100% or more. And that kind of boom has not happened in over a decade. Each of these stocks in the S&P 500 have soared for the 2023 over 100% in value. Uber, that went public in 2019, is up over 155%. And it's smooth sailing for Royal Caribbean Cruises. They're up over 162%. Now, we've talked in the past about Meta, or the former Facebook. They're up just under 200%. And best performing stock in the S&P 500 was NVIDIA. With their lead in AI, they were up almost 239% for this year. And the top sectors for 2023 was technology, leading the way up almost 57%, followed by communication services at just over 55%. Discretionary coming in at almost 42%, then industrials and materials up over 16% and 10.6% as well. Now, a lot of the buying is the thought of the Federal Reserve will be cutting interest rates next year. We've had 3 pauses in the last 4 times that the Federal Reserve has met. Well, the market is expecting 6 cuts in 2024, next year, of 150 basis points or 1.5% next year. Now, these cuts are baked into the cake with the purchasing of stocks. If they don't cut that 1.5% and earnings don't rise to meet the valuations of these stock prices, if they start cutting too soon, then inflation could start to ramp up again. But if they don't cut as much as they're expecting, which is 6 cuts or 1.5%, then there will be a pullback in stocks because the market buys on forward earnings and on forward news. And what goes up will then certainly be coming down. Stocks declined in late day trading. For the week, the pops were technology and communication services, as well as in the industrial sector. And the Dow Jones leaders were Salesforce, Intel, and Microsoft. And the losers were Walgreens, Chevron, and J&J. It was the first 9-week win streak for the S&P 500 in nearly 20 years. The S&P 500 winners were NVIDIA, Meta, or Facebook, Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines, and the losers were Emphas Energy, FMC, and Moderna. And the NASDAQ ended the month and year up, having its best year since 2009. The NASDAQ leaders were NVIDIA, Meta, and CrowdStrike. And this week, the Dow Jones closed today at 37,714. It was up 0.8 of a point for the week. The S&P 500, they closed today and went 4770, and for the week they were up just under 0.4 of a point. And the NASDAQ, they closed today at 15,011, and it was up about 0.1 of a point for the week. And the Santa Claus rally, which officially started last Friday before Christmas, has been tracked since 1950. Now, it all starts the last 5 trading days of the year, plus the first 2 days of trading in January. It occurs just over 80% of the time it happens, and the last time, though it did not happen, was in 2018. So are we on target as in past years? I'd say yes for us now in 2023. When it officially started last Friday, we were now 5 of the 7 days into the Santa Claus rally, and presently we're up 0.9 of 1%, and the average gain would be at 1.3% average at this time. So it generally is the best 7 consecutive days of the whole year, generally, and we still have 2 more days into January to see if we're going to make it. Now, we're also in a seasonal pattern where the best 6 months of the trading year are November through April. And narrowing it down even further, 3 of those good months are November through January. Also, as we've mentioned on the show before, the last quarter of the pre-election year usually always ends strong, and we did this year. Some may wonder why these December through January months usually are very good for the markets. Well, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we had George Ball on our show as our guest. George is the former CEO and chairman of Prudential Beach Securities, and he was also the CEO of E.F. Hutton. And he said that many investors are selling their stock losses for tax purposes, plus new money is coming in normally in January. And also, finally, many of Wall Street, plus other businesses as well, as employees get their end-of-year bonuses, they put it into the stock market. So, with today being the last trading day for December, was this month as good as November's? Well, for the month, the Dow Jones ended up, for the month, the best up at 6.3%. And with the S&P 500 trailing at 4.3%, they ended for December. And for the NASDAQ, they ended up just under 4.8% for the month. So goes the month, and today was the last trading day for the year as well. For the year of 2023, the Dow Jones closed up for the year up 13.7%. And the S&P 500, they closed up the year at 24.3%. And the NASDAQ, well, they had a major win for the year, up almost 43.5% for the year. That was a blowout. And at the beginning of the year, the larger investment companies and banks make predictions as to how the S&P 500 will end. And 2023 was no different. Now, just to refresh, the S&P 500 closed for 2023, closed today at 4770, down for the day at 12.7%, and points rather. Now, this ending of the S&P 500 was higher than any of the forecasters had predicted. So take a look at the banks that predicted back in January 1st what the end today would be, such as Deutsche Bank predicting today the S&P 500 would end at 4,500. J.P. Morgan thought that the index was going to end at 4,200. Morgan Stanley and UBS were the lowest thinking today's S&P 500 would end at 3,900. And Bank of America and Citibank both predicted today that the S&P would end at 4,000, and all of them were wrong. Dan Ives, the stock analyst at Wedbush Securities, he's raising his 2024 price target of Microsoft from his original $425 a share to $450 a share. Dan said that their Copilot 2024 monetization will be a game changer and that 60% or more of their installed base will be on AI within the next 3 years. And Morgan Stanley is saying for next year, they see continued growth for Netflix, the online streaming service. Morgan Stanley is increasing their price target, and next year for Netflix, raise their price target to $550 a share. That's an increase of 13% from today's closing price. Netflix is up almost 76% from the beginning of the year. Well, one big story in 2023, which caught every investor's attention, was the explosion of AI investing. Many tech companies that were including in what was known as the Magnificent Seven were heavily investing in AI research and development. And other companies not included in those 7 stocks were also beneficiaries of artificial intelligence AI boom. Now, companies as AMD, they're up 123% for the year. And one many may not have heard of, but was sure high, was Arista Networks. They're up almost 100% for this year, followed by Cloudflare at 89%. And throughout the year, basically due to a time element, there are a lot of other sectors that may have soared, but we just don't have time to put them in within our show. But we always like to bring you the large cap indexes such as the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ. But take a look at this year in the small cap indexes such as the S&P 600. They're up 25% for the year. Or the Russell 2000, which are small cap stocks, they were up almost as much at 24% for 2023. And yes, the Magnificent Seven stocks were the engine of all the 500 S&P stocks and the S&P. But even if you took out those 7 stocks, the S&P would still be up for the other 493 stocks. It would still be up 10% for the whole year. 2023 saw many citizens leaving some states such as California, Illinois, and New York. And they were moving to Texas. And many reasons are from their own doing. You've heard about the laws of unintended consequences. In April, the state of California passed a law to pay fast food workers $20 an hour, even though most of these jobs are what's known as starter jobs. Franchisee owners of Pizza Hut will have to now be laying off 1,200 delivery drivers in California as fast food restaurants brace for a $20 an hour wage increase. Now, that'll be starting next year in 2024. The layoffs go into effect for fast food workers and will be starting in February because, under California law, they require a 60-day notice before mass layoffs occur. Other fast food restaurants, such as Chipotle and others, are going to be raising their prices. So I guess you could be ready for that $20 Happy Meal at your local McDonald's if you lived in California. So Florida is also known as the Sunshine State, and the population in Florida grew 1.7% for this year by over 365,000 new residents that were moving in, and was only the second growth state only to Texas. Citadel hedge fund owner and founder Ken Griffith, who is also the chief investment officer, who recently moved from Chicago to Miami, Florida in 2022, said Florida could become the financial capital of the world. Now, we'll tell you the latest on the housing markets and Bitcoin when we return. Well, if you've tried to buy a home recently, you have noticed a low supply on the market. But lately, a 30-year home fixed rate have come down to now 6.6% for a 30-year fixed rate. Now, most people who are living in a home with a lower interest rate mortgage, well, they're staying put and not selling their home to get into a newer one with a higher mortgage. Now, even if it's only a 2% difference in interest rates, to show you just how a 2% rise in interest rates could affect your premium. Now, on an average $400,000 home and 20% down, a 6% mortgage rate would run you just over $1,900 per month. Now, that amount is without insurance and property taxes, but an 8% rate is just under $2,350 for the same house, but 2% interest rates higher. Now, that's a difference of $430 per month, and over a one-year period, it's over $5,100. And for those families on the edge, that could make or break a deal of buying a home or not. And by the way, the supply of homes for sale are about 38% below the pre-pandemic level. So now the question is going to be, will more people with a smaller drop in 30-year fixed rates try to beat the competition and get it? Will they try and sell their present home and buy into a new one where the new interest rates have dropped from 8% to just over 6.5%? And for the first-time home buyers purchasing that starter home, a 6.6% mortgage could possibly be a deal killer. And by the way, that 6.6% is for the best credit-worthy buyers. Others will be paying much more than I just quoted you. And inflation could still come back. Prices have been going down, but take such as a home equity line of credit, a HELOC. Well, last year, you would have been paying 3.9%. Now, it's just over 10%. A new car financing has gone from 4.4% of last year to almost 7.75% this year. And credit cards that were 16.3% last year on unpaid balances is now almost 21% interest on that unpaid balance. So last week, we had as our guest Tim Urbanowitz. Tim was the head of research and investments at Innovator Capital and specializing in ETF funds. And I asked him if there were ETFs for Bitcoin and other types of cryptocurrencies coming out. And he said not yet, but they will be coming soon. And by the way, Bitcoin, it's up almost 158% for the year. Bitcoin did well. Now, some of the companies that have applied to have ETFs to trade in the cryptocurrency world, ETFs include BlackRock, WisdomTree, Fidelity Investments, Grayscale, and Cathie Woods' ARK Investments. Now, there's no doubt that a Bitcoin ETF will be popular amongst the investors, but SEC Chairman Gary Gensler, he's taking his time for having oversight of this type of an investment. But as you can see, that the decision for approval of a Bitcoin ETF is fast approaching the critical deadline. So, will there be more for 24? Well, this will be an election year, and as if you didn't know that. And in election years, when there is a sitting president who is running, which is happening, the S&P 500 has not declined and has averaged a 12.2% annual gain in re-election years. But oddly, curiously enough, though, when there is no incumbent president, it's down 1.5%. Now, there may be some unforeseen areas that we think of as black swans that could spook the stock market. In November, just last month, while meeting in San Francisco with Joe Biden, Chinese leader Xi Jinping told Biden in no uncertain terms that China plans on reunifying Taiwan with mainland China. Well, the Chinese leader's message got the attention of U.S. officials because it was delivered at a meeting that was intended to reduce tensions. Now, from those who were in the room said that there was no ambiguity of his desire. So what about companies such as Taiwan Semiconductor and other businesses who do business in China and also that do business in Taiwan? President Joe Biden said he won't let China take over Taiwan, but is Xi Jinping calling his bluff? And does Xi Jinping feel now is the time because our leadership will or will not push back? Stay tuned. According to a recent CNBC poll last week on Biden's handling of the economy, it doesn't look good. As James Carville said, it's the economy, stupid, when he worked in the Clinton years. 64% of registered voters disapprove of his handling of the economy, while 31% approve. Of his handling of foreign policy, it isn't much better. 63% disapprove, with 29% of those registered voters approving of Biden's job performance in foreign policy. And rising attacks by Houthi rebels in the Red Sea could put more pressure on shippers in 2024. According to U.S. Central Command, Houthi rebels that are being funded and backed by Iran are taking over cargo ships traveling through the Red Sea. USS Mason shot down a drone and an anti-ship ballistic missile in the southern Red Sea last night. And there were no damages to either the Mason, the USS Mason, or to other of the 18 U.S. Navy ships in the Red Sea, and no reported injuries. And it's the 22nd attempted attack by Houthi rebels since October the 19th on shipping in that area, causing shipping companies to divert from the Red Sea a normal passage through other longer areas. Cargo shipping area rates that are soaring because cargo ships are now having to be diverted to other routes. As an example, a container coming from Shanghai to the UK used to cost about $1,900 just last week. Today, that same container will cost approximately $10,000. And yes, you're right, those costs will be passed on to the consumer. Well, every week we ask if you have a question or a comment that you can always contact us. And many of you do, and we always appreciate that and try to answer you back via email. But some of the questions that have been far and wide in viewers' thoughts, we thought since we had a moment, we thought we'd like to respond on air to some of those letters. Matt from Pensacola, Florida wants to know, besides Friday nights, what do I do during the day? Well, Matt, this is actually my part-time job. During the day, I invest clients' money, and I'm the chief investment officer of a company called Benna Capital. Benna Capital is a long-term alternative asset management investment company. So in other words, I run a hedge fund. And Jennifer wants to know if next year in 2024 will be as good for the stock market as this year. Jennifer, I wish I had a crystal ball and could say for sure. I'm hopeful that it will be in an up year in many because 2024 will be, as we mentioned earlier, an election year. Now, normally, election years are good for the stock market because politicians, they want to keep their jobs. And they know you can't do anything to them for the other 3 years that they're not running. But on an election year, they scramble to do what the actual public opinions want them to do rather than what they really want to do for the other 3 years. Plus, the Federal Reserve is scheduled to lower interest rates next year with the highest probabilities in March, in May, and in June. Now, the feeling on the street is the Federal Reserve will be cutting 150 basis points, or 1.5%, off the present position of 5.5%, which is what they charge banks for loaning out money. And these cuts are baked into today's stock prices. So if they cut less than that they're predicting of 1.5%, be prepared for some sell-offs. Sean from Biloxi, Mississippi writes, what do I consider short-term and or long-term when investing in stocks? Well, Sean, I look at stocks as a long-term investment. If you're going to be needing the money within maybe a year or 15 months, I wouldn't do stocks. I would consider short-term instruments such as money markets or and pay a monthly yield. If your time horizon is maybe 5 years or more, stocks are a great investment. Now, when I invest in stocks, I look at holding them for at least a 10 to 15 year time horizon. So, if you've got a question or maybe a comment about the show, we'd love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it pithy, and write us at Andre@BennaCapital.com. So, let's take a look at the market starting in 2024 for next year. But before we do that, what popular board game was patented on this day in 1935? Well, we've got the answer, and it's coming up. Well, what popular board game was patented on this day in 1935? Monopoly. And finally, a wrap up on Wall Street. The Justice Department is threatening to sue the state of Texas if the state implements its new immigration enforcement law of arresting illegal immigrants who cross the border from Mexico. The U.S. Census Bureau reported that the world population grew by 75 million people this past year. It said it predicts the world's population will stand at more than 8 billion people on New Year's Day. And the struggle for MBA grads seems to be heating up even as the world's best business schools. According to Business Insider, only 86% of Harvard MBA grads had a job offer this year within 90 days of graduation. Last year, the rate was 95% within 90 days and 96% in 2021 of graduation. And the world has its first $100 billion woman, Françoise Bettencourt Meyers. She is the granddaughter of the founder of the French beauty brand L'Oreal, and she's cracked the $100 billion barrier, becoming the first woman to boast that 12-figure fortune. And you can even now afford to pay retail for her own beauty products. Big changes are coming next year. By the way, that's this coming Monday, January 1st. Do you have a 529 college savings plan for yourself or maybe a family member? Well, starting next year on Monday, if you have money left in your 529, you can now roll that money over to your Roth IRA tax-free. Prior to this time, the funds in that 529, well, they had to be used towards qualified education expenses, but now that extra 529 money can be put towards your retirement. And that's a wrap-up on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Monday is the new year and markets are closed, but trading will resume on Tuesday through Friday. And coming up next week, we're going to be talking with Harvard Law School Professor Emeritus Alan Dershowitz. Alan has represented clients everyone from O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Patty Hearst, Jeffrey Epstein, and even Donald Trump. That's Alan Dershowitz. He'll be here next week. Well, 2023 has been a year of weeks and months and down times as well as up. And I'm sure between black swans or geopolitical events, they may create unforeseen experiences that will be affecting the markets maybe this year or something completely new. So we'll get through it and sit back and just enjoy the ride. Have a fun weekend with the ones you love. Happy New Year. I'll see you next year. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Happy New Year, and always remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bambulas, featuring live music. And now, tapas and wine upstairs. Bambulas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.